Respectful Interactions, Disability Language and Etiquette was produced by the Northwest ADA Center at the University of Washington. This movie, People Who Have Non-Apparent Disabilities, is Module 6 of the series Disability Language and Etiquette. The Northwest ADA Center is a member of the ADA National Network. These materials were developed under grant number H133A110015. However, the contents do not necessarily represent the policy of the Department of Education, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government. People who have non-apparent disabilities. A person may have a disability that is not obvious when you first meet him or her. For example, Mike Wallace had clinical depression, Andrea Faye Friedman, a TV actress, has an intellectual disability, and Patty Duke was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Thomas Edison also had dyslexia, Mozart had Tourette syndrome, and Howard Hughes had obsessive-compulsive disorder. Some disabilities that are not readily apparent when you first meet a person are mental health conditions, Tourette syndrome, Asperger's syndrome, chemical sensitivities, rheumatoid arthritis, heart conditions, learning disabilities, other intellectual disabilities, diabetes, cancer, asthma, epilepsy, and fibromyalgia. Some characteristics that non-apparent disabilities have in common are: usually, one is unable to see an outward indicator of the disability when interacting with the person. There are no visible supports to indicate a disability, such as a cane, wheelchair, hearing aid, or sign language interpreter. It is usually a permanent disability that people must cope with on a daily basis. The disability may be managed through medication or behavioral controls, such as in the care of diabetes, asthma, epilepsy, or mental health conditions. Even though the disability can't be seen, it is nonetheless very real to the person. Let's first talk about psychiatric or mental health disabilities. According to Mental Health, a report of the Surgeon General, mental disorders are defined as diagnosable conditions that impair thinking, feeling, and behavior, and interfere with a person's capacity to be productive and enjoy fulfilling relationships. People with psychiatric disabilities or mental health disabilities may have trouble coping with tasks and interactions of daily life, and may be affected in their ability to feel, think, or relate to others. Some common mood disorders are depression, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. Some anxiety disorders are obsessive-compulsive disorder, phobias, panic disorders, and post-traumatic stress disorder. 1 in 6 adults and almost 1 in 10 children have a diagnosable mental disability. Stigma can be as great a challenge as the condition itself. People who have mental health conditions vary greatly concerning their symptoms and ability to function in the community. However, many of these folks have the same messages concerning the importance of interaction and communication. Here are a few of their messages.
I have depression, and depression is a mental illness. But there's a lot of people that have depression, and there's a lot of people that have mental illnesses. But that doesn't mean that the person with the mental illness or even depression is out of touch with reality.
If people don't understand my disabilities, or they don't understand what I'm doing or why I'm doing it, ask me. You know, I firmly believe that how do I expect other people to understand my disabilities if I'm not willing to educate them on it? And so some people feel like they're being rude or they're being ignorant, and really when you ask somebody a question about your disability, it's just the opposite. You're being polite. You're not being ignorant at all. And so, but if you're really you're curious about something, ask. When you ask questions about someone's disability, it takes the scary and the unfamiliar away from the situation. Be patient with me. That's another thing, especially if I don't understand something or you need to communicate it differently, or I'm having to ask another question or something. Just be patient.
In 2003, I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and delusional disorder. just having the diagnosis and people knowing it, they expect that there's certain things that I can't do that I'm perfectly able to do. And I think it's all just because they're not educated.
Honesty, too, is another thing. If you have questions, it's better that I'd rather somebody come and ask me a question than assume. You know, it's okay to ask questions. You know, I have a lot of friends who have disabilities, and there's nothing wrong with asking about their disability, and there's nothing wrong with people asking me about my pseudo-seizures and about what I've been through. You know, I won't be offended if you ask me. I'd rather you ask me than you assume what really happened.
It doesn't take rocket science to communicate. You have to have the will to be patient, the will to show consideration, kindness. But if you're looking at an individual for what that label that they have on them, and you can't see past that, it's self-defeating in the process.
Just because my disability or disabling condition is not visible, that doesn't mean that I don't have one. It doesn't mean that what I have to say is not valid. And so therefore, I just urge anyone working or with any person that has a disability, whether you see it or not, just listen to them and maybe find out a little bit more. Just listen. Sometimes listening is the best way to communicate instead of talking.
And sometimes when you're disabled, they assume like that you are younger mentally too, and you know, they'll wave at you, they'll like talk to you like you're a small child, you know. Well, I think people should talk to everyone the same way, and of course when you're helping someone, your tone of voice changes. But I don't really say anything about it. I just talk to them more adult-like so they understand.
The reason that we feel rejected, we don't feel listened to, is because the way community treats us, because I think they're afraid of what we can do or what we can't do. We are not our mental illness. We have personalities, we have hearts, we have feelings, we have all that. But what we don't have is the support of the community because of the fear. If the community was educated on the way people learn and deal with mental illnesses and some of the tools that are used, some of the reasons why they perceive people with mental illnesses the way they do would diminish. Education stamps out fear, and that is what I have to say about that.
In summary, suggestions for facilitating communication with individuals who have mental health disabilities are: in a crisis, stay calm, be supportive, and ask what you can do to help. Realize that the person may exhibit different symptoms at different times. Medication can affect symptoms. Don't assume that people with psychiatric disabilities can't make decisions or handle stress. There's no need to be overly protective. Show respect, listen, and extend basic courtesy. A person with Tourette syndrome may make uncontrollable sounds or say inappropriate words. Emily describes how Tourette syndrome affects her.
The Tourette syndrome affects interactions with other people is it can be very startling. It can be very surprising. People a lot of times think I'm having a seizure and they think they need to call an ambulance or something like that. Sometimes my tics, T-I-C-S, just make sure, no K, I don't have those. Sometimes my tics, especially if I'm frustrated or angry or stressed out because emotions bring the tics on, sometimes my tics can sound sort of like a scream, or like something's wrong, but nothing's wrong. Also, sometimes people hear the noise and they don't know what it is, and sometimes my ticks sound like a bark, a yap, like from a little dog, and people think it's a dog and they don't realize it's a person. And so for people who are not familiar with Tourette's, it can get confusing as to what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, and am I just trying to be, am I being rude, am I drunk, what's going on.
Asperger's syndrome is an autism spectrum disorder and is characterized by a person's difficulty in social interaction, sometimes making rude or inappropriate comments and having trouble interpreting social cues and forming friendships. They may strive for friendship, they just don't know how to achieve it. Here are some suggestions for facilitating communication. Speak more quietly. Avoid using figures of speech. In other words, break a leg, falling in love. Recognize and respect sensory sensitivities. In other words, lights, sounds, and smells. Understand that rude and blunt comments are usually not intended as such. People with multiple chemical sensitivities and respiratory disabilities, such as asthma or emphysema, react to toxins in the air. Stale air, fumes from cleaning products, perfume, carpeting, air freshener, and even the fumes from magic markers can trigger a severe reaction. What can you do? Avoid spray cleaning tables, windows, or other surfaces while people are in your place of business. If you must use a spray product, spray or pour it closely into the cloth. Use less toxic products. Request others to go easy on fragranced body care products like cologne, hairspray, hand lotion, and aftershave. Follow and enforce no smoking regulations. And maintain good ventilation and good air quality. Let's talk now about persons who have intellectual disabilities. An estimated 2.5 million people in the United States have an intellectual disability and may have limitations in reading, writing, memory, performing calculations, organization, time management, performing or completing tasks, social abilities interacting with coworkers, and working with supervisors. Customers with intellectual disabilities may need accommodations as well. Ways to assist include providing pictures, symbols, or diagrams instead of requiring a person to read, reading instructions to the person, accepting verbal responses instead of written, using voice input on a computer, allowing someone else to write down what a person wants to say, posting written or pictorial instructions on frequently used machines, providing calculators, dividing instructions into multiple smaller tasks. These two young ladies discuss some misperceptions some people have about interacting with people with intellectual disabilities.
People always assume that the person that you're with is your caretaker and that's it. Or like your brother, and that's it.
Yeah.
So like I'm sure I've had people assume that.
Yeah, that I'm her caretaker. It's like, no, we're neighbors, we're friends.
Going out.
We're going out for food, or we're going to the mall to go shopping. I'm not her caregiver.
About 5 to 20% of adults in the United States have a learning disability. Learning disabilities affect the ability to understand or use spoken or written language, do mathematical calculations, or direct attention. People with dyslexia have trouble reading written information, give verbal explanations, and allow extra time for reading. Some people have problems processing auditory information. They may need information demonstrated or in writing. It may be easier for the person to function in a quiet environment without distractions. Ask the person how you can best relay information. Be direct in your communication. Emily describes ways in which she can more easily understand information that is presented to her.
If it's a meeting where we're going to be talking about something that I'm really not familiar with, I might ask for some information ahead of time, like an outline of what's going to be discussed, just so I have an idea of what's coming up and that kind of stuff. Another thing is be willing to try different ways of explaining things. Sometimes someone will explain something to me and I'll say I don't understand, and then they'll explain to me again exactly the same way they did the first time, and it's like that's not going to help. Be willing to try to draw a picture, to make, to see if you can, if that can help me learn, help me understand the information. Willing to have visuals, different things like that, and not just say, well, no, I'm just going to verbally explain it. That's the only way I know how to do it, so that's the only way you're going to be able to get it. Or, well, even being able to read something is easier for me to understand than hearing it verbally. So having it written down, something that's like an outline, even in the meeting, an outline that I can actually follow along, makes it easier for me to process and understand what I'm hearing.